There comes a moment in life when the noise of the world finally quiets down, when the endless distractions fall away, and you're left with nothing but your own thoughts. In that silence, an uncomfortable question sometimes rises, a question that pierces deeper than most people are willing to admit. Why is it that some people live without friends? At first, the answer seems simple: shyness, bad luck, or perhaps a harsh world that doesn't welcome everyone with open arms. But Carl Jung taught us something far more profound. What we experience outside is rarely random. It is a mirror of what lives within us. And so, the absence of friendships is not just a lack of company. It is a symbol, a message, even a silent revelation about the state of one's soul. Think about it. Some withdraw because the wounds of the past still bleed, even if no one else can see the scars. Others retreat because the world feels unbearably loud, shallow, and chaotic, and they crave a quieter rhythm. And then there are those rare souls who step away not out of fear, but out of an inner search for something more authentic, something real, something the crowd cannot offer. When someone has no friends, it is never just a social fact. It is a window into hidden longings, fears unspoken, and strengths not yet discovered. From Jung's perspective, loneliness is not an accident. It is the language of the unconscious, urging us to stop looking outward for validation and start listening inward to the whispers we've ignored. Perhaps what looks like emptiness is actually the soul's way of saying, before you can meet others, you must first meet yourself. Childhood often plants the seed of this solitude. A child who grows up unseen, unheard, or misunderstood quickly learns to silence their feelings. They grow into an adult who withdraws, who builds walls invisible to the outside eye. Rejection plays its role too. Those who have tasted betrayal, ridicule, or abandonment often develop the instinct to protect themselves through isolation. It is as though the soul whispers, "Better the safety of solitude than the risk of being shattered again." Yet sometimes the cause isn't wound or fear, but depth. There are people whose inner world runs so deep they cannot endure the shallow waters of small talk. They seek truth in a world intoxicated by triviality. They crave depth in a culture obsessed with surfaces, and so their solitude is not a weakness, but a refusal to settle for less than what their soul demands. Jung once said, "Loneliness does not arise from not having people around you, but from being unable to share what matters most to you." That single truth cuts through every illusion. Loneliness is not about numbers. A person can be surrounded by dozens of acquaintances and still feel starved while another sits in solitude, rich with inner conversation, closer to the essence of life than most ever reach. When you look at someone with no friends, don't be deceived by the silence around them. Behind it often lies a storm of thought, a secret battle, or an untold longing. Sometimes what looks like a void is actually a stage of initiation, the beginning of a transformation. Because the absence of friendships, painful as it may seem, is often a hidden path carved by the unconscious, pushing us toward our own truth. Mythology has always known this. The archetype of the hermit appears across traditions, a figure who withdraws not because he is broken, but because he is called. He steps into the desert, the cave, the wilderness, not to escape life, but to meet it on its deepest terms. The old man with the lamp in the tarot doesn't symbolize despair. He symbolizes the search for light within the darkness. And whether you know it or not, when life strips you of friends, you are walking that very path. At first, this loneliness feels like punishment. The nights stretch on, the silence weighs heavy, and questions echo louder than answers. It feels like you've failed some unspoken test of human connection. But from a Jungian lens, it is not failure at all. It is invitation. The psyche is saying, you are not meant to live on borrowed voices anymore. You are meant to hear your own. In my work, I've met people who whispered through tears, I have no friends. I feel so alone. And while the world might have seen only lack, I saw something else, a seed of transformation waiting to break open. For when you walk through loneliness with open eyes, you begin to uncover treasures that constant company would never have allowed you to see. You meet your shadow? Yes, the fears, the anger, the sadness you've buried. But you also discover the strength, creativity, and wisdom that come from facing them head on. Society teaches us to equate worth with numbers, with how many people surround us, how many messages flood our phones, how many hands clap for us in the crowd. But the soul doesn't count like that. The soul values depth over width, authenticity over performance. And so when life removes the shallow, it is often because something greater is trying to surface. To be without friends is not to be abandoned. It is to stand at a threshold between who you were and who you are becoming. And like every myth, like every hero's journey, that threshold looks at first like exile, but it is in truth initiation. There is a reason why in so many sacred stories, before revelation comes, there is exile. Moses wandered the desert. The Buddha sat alone under the Bodhi tree. Even Christ endured 40 days of solitude before stepping into his mission. Isolation has never been a sign of defeat. It has always been the prelude to transformation. When life pulls us away from the crowd, when friendships fall apart or simply never arrive, it often feels like a cruel joke. But from the perspective of the psyche, it is a cleansing. It strips away what is false so that what is real can be born. The absence of friends, as painful as it feels, can be the soul's way of forcing us to face what we would otherwise run from. It tears down the masks we wear, leaving us face to face with our own shadow. And the shadow is where many of us flinch. Jung described the shadow as those hidden parts of our personality we deny, repress, or try to bury because they don't fit the image we want to show the world. We want to be seen as kind, confident, strong, yet inside we may also carry anger, envy, weakness, or fear. The problem is that what we reject doesn't disappear. It waits in silence, pressing against the walls of the unconscious, longing to be acknowledged. When someone has no friends, when social distractions fall away, the silence of solitude makes those voices louder. Old sadnesses rise, forgotten anger surfaces, jealousy whispers, fear lingers. At first it feels unbearable, as if the very walls of the soul are closing in. And yet, this is not punishment, it is initiation. For only by facing what is buried can transformation truly begin. The paradox is that loneliness, which we fear as emptiness, often becomes the crucible of rebirth. I've seen patients who told me that their darkest hour was the moment when no one remained by their side. And yet, that same moment was the threshold of awakening. Behind anger, they found their hunger for justice. Behind sadness, they uncovered their need for self-love. Behind envy, they discovered hidden potential. Behind fear, they found the very territory of their growth. Solitude strips us bare. It leaves no room for excuses, no audience to perform for, no crowd to hide behind. It forces us to face ourselves exactly as we are. And though this confrontation burns, it is the very fire in which the false self is reduced to ash, making room for the true self to emerge. Think of the mythical hero descending into the underworld to face the dragon. That dragon is nothing but our shadow, the guilt, insecurities, and wounds we refuse to see. It looks terrifying because it holds the power we've abandoned. But once faced, once integrated, that dragon becomes an ally. Its fire becomes our own strength. The absence of friends, then, is not a curse. It is the condition that makes this descent possible. And what emerges on the other side is astonishing. Loneliness transforms into a kind of alchemy. The ashes of who you thought you were give rise to something new. Like the phoenix, you rise again, not as the same fragile being who feared rejection, but as someone who has touched the depths of their own soul. This is why, paradoxically, those who have truly endured loneliness often form the deepest, most authentic relationships later on. Before, many friendships were built out of need for validation, fear of abandonment, hunger for distraction. But once solitude has done its work, once you've faced yourself, relationships no longer come from desperation. They flow from abundance. You are no longer searching for someone to fill the void. You are sharing the fullness you have found within. And people feel that difference. They are drawn not to your neediness, but to your authenticity. It is as if you develop an invisible magnet, one that doesn't attract crowds, but attracts the right souls. Those who, like you, have walked through their own darkness and are unafraid of truth. These connections are not built on convenience or entertainment. They are born of honesty, growth, and mutual recognition. From the outside, it may look like having no friends is a failure. But in truth, it can be a preparation, a secret initiation, a spiritual incubation period in which life hides you away, not to punish you, but to allow you to grow roots so deep that when you finally emerge, you are unshakable. We fear loneliness because society has taught us that being alone is shameful. We measure worth by the size of a circle, the number of invitations, the followers on a screen. But the soul doesn't care about any of that. The soul calls us not to be popular, but to be whole. And sometimes the only way to become whole is to walk through the desert alone. Because in that desert, you learn something the noisy world cannot teach you, that your greatest companion has always been within. That even in silence, you are not abandoned. That what you thought was emptiness was actually space, the space needed for rebirth. So when you find yourself without friends, when the world feels far away, do not assume it is a curse. Consider that it might be your soul, guiding you through a passage that most people never dare to enter. A passage not toward isolation forever, but toward relationships that are real, raw, and enduring. Loneliness is not the absence of life. It is the soil in which new life is planted. If you look closely, you'll see that nothing in life is ever random. What looks like a cruel emptiness is often a carefully veiled message. Even the silence of loneliness carries meaning. It is as though the unconscious is whispering, "Stop searching outside. Listen inside." Jung often said that dreams send encrypted messages to restore balance in our psyche. In the same way, circumstances in life can act as symbols. The absence of friends is one of those symbols. It is not proof that you are unworthy or broken. It is an invitation to peel away the masks, to meet yourself in honesty, and to begin again, not as the person you pretended to be, but as the person you truly are. I've seen it countless times in practice. People sit in front of me, confessing in shame. I don't know why, but I just can't seem to hold on to friends. Society tells them they are failures, misfits, or unlovable. Yet behind the pain, I often recognize a deeper process at work. It's as if their unconscious is protecting them from superficial ties, guiding them away from noise, and pushing them toward the depth they've avoided for years. What looks like punishment is often incubation, a time of silence, a cocoon in which the soul prepares for transformation. And yes, it hurts. In a culture that glorifies constant connection, to stand apart feels unbearable. Social media counts your worth in likes. Workplaces measure it in networking. Families question it when they see you alone. Every signal screams that solitude equals failure. But beneath all that noise, your inner life is telling a different story. The soul is saying, stop conforming, stop chasing, become real. When the masks finally crack, when forced friendships fall away, when you can no longer perform for acceptance, loneliness is what remains. Yet within that loneliness lies the seed of the authentic self. This is the path of individuation Jung described, the process of becoming who you are meant to be instead of the copy of what others expect. The myths echo this truth again and again. Heroes go into exile before they discover their calling. Moses wandered the desert. The Buddha withdrew into silence before enlightenment. Christ endured solitude before stepping into his mission. These stories are not accidents. They remind us that isolation is often the doorway to revelation. What feels like social defeat may, on a deeper level, be initiation. A sacred rite. Your psyche is saying, now is the time to shed the old skin. Now is the time to face the silence. Now is the time to be reborn. This process is not easy. Loneliness confronts you with your shadow in ways no distraction can soften. Suddenly, suppressed feelings rise to the surface. Anger you thought you had outgrown. Sadness you buried decades ago. Envy you were ashamed to admit. Fear that clings to you like a second skin. Normally, the noise of social life drowns out these voices. But in solitude, they roar. Most people run from this moment. They drown it out with entertainment, fill it with superficial connections, or numb it with endless distraction. But for those who dare to remain, something extraordinary happens. Each painful emotion reveals its hidden meaning. Anger shows where justice is missing. Sadness whispers of a need for self-love. Envy points toward unused potential. Fear highlights the terrain where courage must grow. Loneliness forces you to see the dragon within. But here lies the paradox. That dragon is not your enemy. It is energy waiting to be reclaimed. When you finally stop running, when you face it with courage, it transforms into power, wisdom, creativity. What once felt like punishment reveals itself as the very condition for wholeness. This is why I often say, loneliness is not a void, it is a crucible. It burns away the false until only truth remains. And that truth is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it strips you of illusions. Liberating because it shows you that you are more than you believed. Crossing the desert of loneliness, you begin to realize that the company you feared losing was never your foundation. The only company you cannot lose is yourself, your whole self, with both light and shadow. And when you finally accept this, something within you shifts. The silence no longer feels like an enemy. It becomes a teacher. I've witnessed it in people who have endured long seasons of solitude. At first, they resist, they ache, they cry, but eventually a quiet transformation begins. They learn to observe their thoughts instead of being consumed by them. They learn to sit with their feelings without immediately running. They discover wells of creativity, flashes of intuition, whispers of wisdom they never noticed before. This process resembles the myth of the phoenix, burned in the fire of loneliness, reduced to ash by the weight of silence, and then rising again. Not the same as before, but changed, stronger, clearer, free from the constant hunger for external approval. And with this rebirth comes a new way of relating to others. Before, friendships were often built on need, on the desperation to not be alone, on the fear of rejection, on the attempt to fill an inner void. But after solitude does its work, something shifts. Relationships are no longer sought from lack, but from fullness. You don't approach people because you need them to complete you. You approach because you have something to share. And that changes everything. You stop chasing crowds and start recognizing the rare souls who vibrate on the same frequency. You stop filling time with meaningless chatter and start seeking conversations that nourish growth, that share truth, that awaken the heart. After loneliness, you no longer want numbers, you want depth. In that way, what once felt like loss becomes preparation. The soul, through the pain of emptiness, was preparing you for the right kind of fullness. If you truly look at life through the lens of the unconscious, you will see that nothing is meaningless, not even loneliness. What feels like abandonment often carries a secret purpose. What feels like emptiness is sometimes the most sacred space being carved out within you. The ego hates this truth. The ego, conditioned by society, screams that loneliness is failure. It tells you that you must fill the silence at once, that something is wrong if no one is around. But the soul whispers differently. The soul knows that sometimes the absence of noise is the only way you will finally hear what has been calling to you all along. In my years of observing people, I've seen how solitude becomes a kind of hidden laboratory of the spirit. Stripped of distraction, essential questions finally rise. Who am I? Really? What is the meaning of my existence? What direction is my life meant to take? These questions cannot be answered in the crowd, in the noise of constant validation, or in the glitter of approval. They can only be answered in the intimacy of one's own soul, and this is where loneliness reveals its sacred dimension. When external doors close, an inner door opens, the door to the eternal. The soul needs silence to awaken. Without silence, there can be no deep listening. Without listening, there can be no revelation. What looks like emptiness is in truth the womb of meaning, preparing you for a life more aligned with who you are. That is why, in every spiritual tradition, solitude is never dismissed as weakness. Prophets went into the desert, sages withdrew into the mountains, initiates endured long nights of silence. They understood that in the absence of human noise, the deepest truths of the universe reveal themselves. Loneliness, in this sense, is not exile, but initiation. It is a threshold into a new way of being. And here is the astonishing part. When you walk through this loneliness, you discover that you are never truly alone. You begin to sense that something greater has always been walking with you, whether you call it God, the self, the eternal, or simply the deeper essence of life itself. Even in your darkest hour, you feel a presence that does not abandon you, a strength that does not break, a light that does not extinguish. This realization changes everything. Suddenly, loneliness is no longer a burden. It is a teacher. It strips away the unnecessary, confronts you with your fragility, but at the same time connects you with a strength beyond the human. The ego may ache, but the soul knows. It is being prepared for something truer, more conscious, more deeply rooted in meaning. I've learned that what we fear most is often what we most need, and loneliness is one of those mysteries. Many flee from it into distractions, attachments, endless noise. But those who endure it, those who face it with courage, stand at the threshold of transformation. For loneliness is not a sentence, it is a ritual, a silent initiation into the discovery of your truest self. This is what Jung called individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming whole. It does not happen in the crowd. It happens when you gather yourself inward, when you reconcile the light and the shadow, the conscious and the unconscious, the masculine and the feminine within you. When life takes away external friendships, it often gives you the opportunity to cultivate the most important friendship of all, the friendship with yourself. And no bond is more essential than this one. For only when you have learned to walk with yourself can you truly walk with others without dependence, without manipulation, without masks. Only then can love flow as sharing, not as desperate hunger. Only then do relationships become authentic, because they are rooted not in need, but in truth. Loneliness also teaches us something liberating, that true freedom is not the ability to do anything we want, but the courage to be exactly who we are, without masks, without roles, without the tyranny of what others will say. In solitude, you no longer have to perform, and in that release, you discover a peace that no external approval can ever provide. When you stop searching outside for what can only be found within, something extraordinary happens. The silence you feared becomes the space where the eternal speaks. The noise of the world fades, and in its place you begin to hear the softest whisper, the whisper of your own soul, guiding you home. And in that moment, you realize you were never truly alone. Not once. What looked like absence was, in fact, a deeper presence. What looked like loss was the preparation for awakening. Having no friends was not a punishment. It was a sacred invitation to meet yourself, to transform, and to be reborn. So if you are walking through loneliness right now, do not despair. You are standing on the edge of revelation. This silence is not empty. It is full of meaning waiting to be uncovered. This darkness is not punishment. It is the womb of your light. The path may feel unbearable at times, but it is shaping you into someone unshakable. Someone who will rise, not with masks, but with authenticity. Someone who will no longer chase shallow connections, but attract real bonds, the kind that last, the kind that nourish, the kind that recognize the soul. In the end, what looked like abandonment reveals itself as privilege, the privilege of knowing yourself deeply, of transforming, of being reborn into a life that is truly yours. And when you return from that desert of loneliness, you will not return empty. You will carry a light within you, a light that will draw to you the people who see you as you are and walk beside you on the path of truth. Loneliness is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the awakening.